My connection with clay was quite immediate. I've had that kind of response that I see a lot of my students have, which is a kind of addiction where the touch of the material is more meaningful than anything. Perhaps because it's so responsive to the sense of touch, it conveys your sense of self back to yourself very, very clearly. It reflects it. So there's that nice communication that can happen through material. And later that became the essence of a whole body of work for me. I discovered that it was something to do with the body and more to do with not just my body, but how then I create connections between my hands as a maker particularly, and then to the user or the person who's connecting with my pieces in whatever way. So I became interested in exploring that connection much more deeply. I was really lucky to get a workshop training with a fantastic potter, Australian potter, Andrew Halford, straight after I left university. And Andrew had come back from 5 years training in Japan, and he was able to teach me Japanese techniques. So for the first time I was learning Japanese techniques in his studio with him in a fairly traditional mode of practice. So that was an extremely formative time for me, and I was working beside him in a big workshop with some fantastic other potters as well. And then at the end of the 3 years with him, Andrew helped me to get an apprenticeship. I had a couple of years in Japan at a wonderful studio called Shusaigama. It's on the west coast of Japan. I had 7 teachers, so in that time what I took away from that, one of the main things that I took from that experience was that 7 teachers have 7 different senses of touch. And I was able to explore that later when I did the master's degree, looking at how people's personality comes through their sense of touch in the reflective material that is clay. It was wonderful to realise that there's a language there. It's almost invisible to most people, but it was a wonderful gift to me to then be able to bring that into my own practice. My introduction to Japanese ceramics was through this bowl, which my sister brought back from Japan. She was an exchange student. I was studying ceramics, and my first impressions were that it was a pretty funny bowl because it's got very wobbly rim. I was imagining that it was made by an amateur and didn't really understand the Japanese expression at all. It wasn't until I started studying a bit more in depth and a little bit more about the tea ceremony that I realised that at the time when it was made, it was part of a very long and venerable tradition of making tea wares in Japan. Recently my work's taken a bit of a change and become a bit more sculptural and perhaps a bit more narrative. I was really lucky to be invited to put my work in a national exhibition called the Vitrify Al Corso Ceramic Awards, and it was an exhibition that encouraged the development of new work. So I felt like I was doing another master's degree all over again, but what really made me focus on my research more was my connection to a landscape around the Murray River where I grew up in northeast Victoria, which is a really ancient, beautiful landscape where the river has carved a pathway through the land over millions of years. And I'm very aware of that, having grown up there, but also very aware of the power of the river, the power of water, and some of the similarities with the materials that I'm using with clay. Not just clay coming from the land, but the water carving the clay as well and depositing the clay. So it made me really aware that when I'm actually touching clay, I'm touching millions of years of history in molecules under my fingertips.